I opened the old safe that had stood in our living room for decades, and my heart nearly stopped. Inside were documents proving ownership of an island in Florida. And my son had already arranged to take it from me. I remember the day my husband brought home that safe like it was yesterday. It was the mid-1970s, back when a heavy steel box still meant something. He had rolled it through the door with the help of two neighbors, both of them grunting and cursing good-naturedly as they maneuvered it into our den. I stood off to the side, wiping flour from my hands, wondering why on earth we needed such a thing. "This," he said, patting the top with his broad hand, "is our protection for the future." He had that gleam in his eyes, the one that meant the conversation was over. I knew better than to ask too many questions. I made us iced tea instead, served in tall glasses with lemon slices, while the men bolted it to the floor. Over the years, the safe became just another piece of furniture. I dusted it when I cleaned the den, set a vase of flowers on it sometimes, and eventually piled boxes on top when space grew tight. After my husband passed, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The combination lay folded in an envelope in the desk drawer, but I never used it. It was his, not mine. Time passed. The safe sat there silently as life shifted around it. The children grew up, moved out, started families of their own. Seasons turned, wallpaper yellowed, the carpet thinned, and still that box sat, mute, stubborn, waiting. My son used to tease me about it. "Mom," he'd say with a chuckle, "why do you keep that rusty old thing? There's nothing in it but junk. You're better off getting rid of it." He even kicked the bottom once with the heel of his shoe, declaring, "See? Hollow as a drum." I smiled, but deep down I couldn't let it go. It wasn't the safe I was holding on to. It was the memory of my husband's voice, the certainty in the way he'd said, "This is our protection for the future." Years rolled by. The safe collected dust and rust. I stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a scar on your own hand. It simply belonged to the room. But one evening, when the house was quiet and the ticking of the kitchen clock seemed louder than usual, I felt a tug inside me. I don't know what brought it on. Maybe it was the ache of loneliness, or maybe just curiosity finally winning. Whatever it was, I fetched the envelope from the desk, unfolded the paper, and read the numbers my husband had written so long ago. His handwriting had faded some, but the loops and lines were still steady, strong. I knelt by the safe, knees protesting against the carpet, and spun the dial. Left, right, left again. First, nothing. My palms were damp, my breath shallow. Then click. The handle turned. My heart gave a thud. The door groaned as I pulled it open. Inside, I expected old papers, maybe a few forgotten coins, or even nothing at all. But what I saw made my breath catch. Bundles of documents lay neatly stacked, their edges yellowed with age. I pulled one free and held it up under the lamplight. The words swam before my eyes until they sharpened. Deed of ownership, Coastal Island, Florida. I froze. My hands trembled as I leafed through the pages. Maps, surveys, signatures, all neat and proper, bearing my husband's name. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't scraps of paper or long-expired receipts. It was land. A whole island. I sank into the armchair beside the safe, papers spread across my lap. The quiet of the house seemed heavier now, as if the walls themselves were listening. My husband had left me an island, and for decades it had been waiting in silence, hidden in plain sight. I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling my heart hammer. An island. Not a plot of dirt. Not a strip of sand by the road, an island. And all these years I had thought that safe was nothing but ballast. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the ticking clock filling the room. For the first time in years, I wished he were there beside me so I could ask, why? Why didn't you tell me? But the only answer was the rustle of old papers in my lap, whispering secrets from a past that was suddenly alive again. The morning after I found those papers, I couldn't keep the secret to myself. My hands shook as I laid them out on the dining room table, smoothing the creases the way I used to smooth my children's school projects before slipping them into folders. My son had stopped by to bring me groceries as he sometimes did, and I thought, foolishly, that this discovery would bring us closer. When he stepped inside, shrugging off his jacket, I motioned him over. "Look here," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "Your father left us more than memories. He left us an island." He leaned over, scanning the pages. At first, his face was unreadable. Then his eyes hardened, his jaw tight. "Mom," he said flatly, "this is nothing. Just ballast. That land isn't worth a dime." I blinked, taken aback. "Not worth anything? But look at these surveys, these signatures." He pushed the papers back toward me, sharper than he needed to. "You're wasting your time. It's swamp. Old records. Probably underwater by now. Let's just get rid of it." His words cut deeper than he knew. I had expected surprise, maybe even joy. But instead I felt the room grow colder. "Get rid of it?" I whispered. "Yes." His tone left no room for argument. "You don't need this ballast weighing you down." He gathered the grocery bags from the counter and busied himself putting away milk, bread, and fruit, as though the matter were settled. My hands hovered over the papers, my heart thudding. Something in his voice, it wasn't just dismissal. It was urgency. That night, long after he left, I couldn't sleep. I made tea, sat by the window, and stared at the moon's reflection on the quiet street. My husband's words echoed in me. "This is our protection for the future." Protection from what? From whom? I told myself I was being foolish, that my son's reaction was just impatience. But deep inside, a seed of doubt had taken root. It was nearly midnight when I heard his voice again, not in memory, but through the thin walls of this very house. My son had returned, saying he forgot something. I had gone upstairs, not wanting to intrude, but as I reached for my bedroom door, I heard him speaking in a low voice from the kitchen. "Yes," he said, his words clipped. "I showed her. She found the papers." A pause. "Then don't worry. As soon as she signs, the land is ours. They're ready to pay hundreds of millions." Hundreds of millions. My breath caught. My knees weakened, and I clutched the banister to steady myself. He continued, quieter now, but I caught enough. "She won't resist. She's old tired. We'll get her to sign." I stood there in the dark, frozen, listening to my own child plotting against me. My son, the boy I had nursed through fevers, the boy I had sat up with on stormy nights, was speaking of me as though I were an obstacle, a hurdle to be cleared. The phone clicked off. His footsteps moved through the kitchen, casual, unhurried. He left without checking upstairs. When the door closed and silence returned, I sank into the hallway chair, my heart pounding. The papers still lay on the table downstairs. I thought of gathering them up, hiding them, but my body wouldn't move. All I could do was sit there, staring at the shadows on the wall. Betrayal has a taste, I learned that night. Bitter, metallic, like a coin held too long in the mouth. I sat with it, swallowing hard, realizing that the battle ahead would not be against strangers, but against my own blood. When I finally crawled into bed, the sheets were cold and stiff. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I saw my husband's face, the way he looked the day he wheeled that safe into the den. His voice echoed again. "This is our protection for the future." Now I understood. He had not only left me land, he had left me a test. And my son, my own child, was already laying the first trap. The morning after I overheard that call, I went straight to the dining room. The papers I had left spread neatly across the table were gone. At first, I thought perhaps I had misplaced them. I checked the sideboard, the drawers, even the floor beneath the table. Nothing. A chill swept through me. I hurried to the safe. Its heavy door hung open, the metal handle loose. The inside was bare. The neat stacks of deeds, maps, surveys, every last one of them had vanished overnight. I sank to my knees, staring into the hollow space. My son. He had been here. He had taken them. Who else could it be? But when I called him, my voice tight, he denied it flatly. Mom, why would I want those old papers? I told you they're worthless. You probably misplaced them. Pressed him. The safe was open. Everything's gone. A pause. His voice cooled. Then maybe you left it unlocked. Don't blame me for your forgetfulness. Forgetfulness. The word stung more than his denial. I hung up before my anger could spill over. I knew in my bones he was lying. The house felt suddenly unsafe. Every creak of the floorboards made me turn my head. Every shadow seemed heavier. I wandered from room to room, hands trembling, mind racing. My husband's voice whispered in memory. This is our protection for the future. I sat down in the den, staring at the empty safe. Then I remembered something else. His peculiar habit. My husband was a cautious man, one who never trusted a single lock or key. He used to say, "One copy is no copy." He always kept duplicates, of letters, of contracts, of everything that mattered. That thought struck me like a spark in the dark. If he made copies of everything else, surely he did the same for the island. But where? I pulled open old drawers, rifled through recipe boxes, lifted cushions, and climbed into the attic where dust stung my eyes. Hours passed, my hands blackened with age and neglect. I found nothing but brittle newspapers, yellowing photographs, and the odd trinket from years gone by. By evening, despair settled heavy on my chest. My son had taken the originals. If no copies existed, then the truth of the island was gone. But then, as I poured myself a cup of tea to calm my nerves, I glanced at the bookshelf in the living room. On the bottom shelf, tucked between encyclopedias no one had touched in years, sat an old leather photo album. The cover was cracked, its edges worn smooth from countless fingers. I pulled it out, sat at the table, and began turning the pages. Pictures of our early years stared back at me. Our children in Easter outfits, my husband on a fishing trip, Christmas mornings with too many ribbons and not enough room. My eyes blurred with memory. And then, midway through, the photographs stopped. In their place was a slim envelope, yellowed and brittle, sealed with a strip of tape. My hand shook as I slid it free. On the front, in my husband's strong, steady script, were the words, "Island copies." My breath caught. I tore the tape and spilled the contents onto the table. Inside was a second packet of papers. Deeds, maps, surveys, all carefully folded, each bearing the same signatures I had seen the day before. Relief washed over me so hard my body trembled. He had thought ahead. He had known one day these might be threatened. I pressed the papers against my chest, whispering his name like a prayer. For the first time since finding the safe, I felt a flicker of strength. My son could lie, he could steal, he could scheme, but my husband had outwitted him from beyond the grave. I gathered the documents into a plain folder and tucked them into the linen closet, beneath a stack of old quilts no one ever touched. Then I sat back, hands folded, listening to the silence of the house. But it was no longer the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm. It started small, as such things often do. A phone call here, a knock at the door there. First, I told myself it was coincidence. But in my heart I knew better. My son had realized I wasn't going to hand over the papers, and he had called in reinforcements. The first time they came, it was two men in sharp suits. They arrived mid-afternoon, their black car parked neatly in front of my house as if they had every right to be there. One of them carried a briefcase, the other a clipboard. They introduced themselves with practiced politeness, their smiles just a little too perfect. "Mrs. Allen," the taller one said, adjusting his tie. "We represent parties with an interest in your Florida property. We'd like to discuss terms of a sale." I clutched the door frame. "It isn't for sale." He gave a little laugh, the kind meant to soften resistance. Of course. But you must understand the land is complicated. There are legal issues, environmental restrictions. Developers like our clients can help clear those hurdles. You'll be compensated fairly. Fairly? I echoed. Better to sign now, the other chimed in, his eyes sliding past me toward the hallway. While there's still a chance to get compensation. I shut the door on them, my heart pounding. That night I barely slept. Every sound of the house settling felt like footsteps. Every car slowing outside made me tense. When morning came, I thought perhaps it had been a one-time visit. But they came again. Different faces, different suits, the same message. Always polite, always insistent, always circling back to the same words. Sign now. When I refused, the visits turned to pressure. A car with tinted windows began appearing at the end of my street after dusk. The motor idled, the headlights off as though waiting. I drew the curtains, but I could feel their eyes on the house. One evening, as I was making myself a pot of soup, the doorknob rattled. Someone tried it, slow and deliberate. My blood ran cold. I set down the spoon and reached for the phone, but by the time I gathered the courage to peek through the curtain, the porch was empty. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. But later that night I found fresh scratches on the lock, as if someone had been testing it. The house that had once been my sanctuary, the place where my husband and I raised our children, suddenly felt like a fortress under siege. I began double-bolting doors, checking windows twice, 3 times before bed. I slept with the papers close by, hidden beneath a quilt in the linen closet. And through it all my son kept calling. First he used the same sharp tone. Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign. You'll be taken care of. But when I stayed firm, his words grew harsher. You're being selfish. Do you even know what you're holding? You're too old to manage this. The worst part wasn't the strangers, or even the cars lurking in the dark. It was hearing my own child speak to me like I was a burden, an obstacle. One afternoon, after yet another knock at the door, I found a note slipped under the mat. No signature, just typed words. Sign the papers. Time is running out. My hand shook as I held it. I crumpled it and threw it in the trash, but the words burned in my mind long after. I started noticing little things inside the house too. A drawer left open when I knew I had shut it. A window unlatched that I was sure I had locked. Once I came home from church to find the back door ajar. Nothing seemed missing, but I felt watched. I began to wonder if they had already been inside, searching for the papers. At night I sat in my armchair, a blanket pulled tight around me, listening to the house breathe. Sometimes I imagine my husband sitting across from me, his eyes steady, his voice calm. Don't give up. But I was afraid. Afraid of strangers in suits. Afraid of the cars in the dark. Afraid of my own son, whose voice no longer sounded like the boy I had raised. The siege was silent but relentless. And I knew deep down it was only the beginning. The morning after the strangers started to circle like crows, I went back to the safe. I had already pulled the copies from the linen closet and hidden them in 3 different places. A quilt chest, a cookie tin, and wrapped inside an old radio that never worked. But the safe itself still felt like the heart of it all, as if whatever else my husband had planned would be found there. The door hung open on its rusty hinges. I knelt and ran my hand along the cold interior, fingers feeling for anything the light didn't show. That's when my palm brushed against a folded scrap of paper tucked in the very back, behind the bolts and bracket. Someone had slipped it there so well I might never have found it. My husband's handwriting sloped across the page in the measured way I'd known for 40 years. Mary, it read. If you are reading this, they have started. This island is not just land. It holds more than money. If you are under pressure, don't give up. Underneath in smaller letters, he'd written a list. Names, places, a short line. Tom Harlow, Harbor Office, trust me, Orrin Klein, state biologist. There was a little map too, not the kind the surveyors use, but a hand-sketched one with a jagged coastline and a single circled X near a lagoon. He had folded it neat and tucked it away like a secret. I sat back on my heels and the kitchen towel bit into my legs. My throat closed on something I couldn't name. He had known. He had known enough to hide copies and to leave a breadcrumb trail. He'd expected trouble. He'd expected people who would come like sharks when blood hit the water. I took the paper and followed the list because I am stubborn and because the map burned at the corners of my mind. The first thing I did was go to his study. He kept things in thin, sensible stacks in that room. Maps, invoices, letters tied with twine. I started with the top drawer of his desk and the one beneath it, working methodically like I used to when I was putting on the Sunday roast and timing the potatoes to come out right, with patience. In an envelope marked Taxes, 1992, I found a folded photocopy of a letter from the Coastal Research Society. The letterhead was all business, dates, signatures, and inside was a short note about a survey conducted in 1988 noting uncommon migratory patterns and presence of potentially protected species. The letter urged landowners to contact the society before planning development. There was also a battered leather notebook tucked behind a stack of unpaid bills. I flipped through it and found a series of entries dated across the years. He had been meticulous. Notes on meetings, a log of people he'd spoken to, the names that matched the scrap from the safe. He'd scribbled phone numbers, old rotary numbers but still legible, and a short instruction in his familiar script. If anything happens, call Orrin. Do not sell. P. Orrin Klein. I remembered the name. My husband had mentioned him once at dinner. A man who studied birds along the coast, the sort who wore binoculars even at town lunches. My husband had respected him. Respect had taken a strange form in our house. Quiet nods across a newspaper, a half-closed door to a study where maps and lists lived. Now those small signs of respect felt like lifelines. There were photographs too. Black and white prints showing a narrow spit of sand, a mangrove-fringed pool, and a bird I didn't recognize, spindly and proud, its crest raised as if mid-speech. On the back of one photo my husband had written, "Noted by Orrin, 5 of 87. Keep." The dates ran like small beacons through the pages. 1987, 1991, 1995. He had not treated the island as a commodity. He treated it as evidence. I gathered those things up, the notebook, the photocopy, the photographs, and the map. My hands moved before my head caught up. I took the safe scrap and pinned it inside my cardigan like a talisman. Then I went through his desk for anything else that might be useful and found, beneath a list of household accounts, a key taped to the underside of the drawer. A small brass key, dull with age, with a tag that read, Harbor Box 14. There was a box at the harbor then. Of course there was. He'd always preferred to keep the most sensitive things somewhere with salt in the air, and a harborman who trusted him. I could picture him years ago, nudging the key into the palm of some friend at dawn and whispering for later. If they come, she mustn't be alone. I wrapped the key in a handkerchief and slid it into my pocket. I tied the leather notebook closed with my hair ribbon and put the photos in the inside pocket of my coat. I didn't tell a soul. I didn't call my son. I drove to the harbor like a woman who'd been given a mission. The harbor smelled of diesel and tar and gulls, the sort of honest smells that tell you where you are. Box 14 was a rusted metal locker nestled between a stack of lobster traps and a moth-eaten life preserver. The harbor man, Tom Harlow, the name on the list, recognized me without the need for introductions. He had known my husband. He tipped his cap and handed over a wooden box with my name scratched into the bottom. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were more papers, a sealed envelope stamped conservation files. Not for sale, and a list of instructions. If coerced, go to Orrin. File copies with county clerk. Call Margaret at the firm, slow, steady, do not panic. Margaret's name I didn't know, but Oren's I did. I tucked the conservation files under my arm and before I drove home, sat on a bench and opened the envelope. The conservation packet turned out to be a small, careful dossier. Survey notes, a typed memo explaining the presence of nesting grounds for a bird species that had recently been listed under state protection. There were hand-drawn boundaries and a lawyer's stamp in one corner. Someone had taken legal steps to ensure the island's status mattered beyond dollars. I understood then what my husband meant. The island was more than dirt and sand. It had laws and witnesses and a network of people who would speak up if someone tried to treat it as a commodity. He had not stashed a fortune in a box for greed. He had built a shield. On the drive back, I held that shield tight. The safe had given me a note to tell me not to give up. The harbor master had given me papers that said I didn't have to. My husband had built a map of people and proof and places, and in those lines, in those names, he had left me the means to fight. When I unlocked the front door, the house seemed smaller in a good way, as if its rooms had bent closer to shelter me. The strangers might circle. The phones might ring. But now I had clues, and with clues come plans. I didn't think my son could wound me worse than he already had. But then came the letter. It arrived in a stiff white envelope, the kind that looks too clean, too official. I slid it open with my husband's old pocket knife, the one I keep in the drawer by the stove. Inside was a notice from the county court. My son, my own flesh and blood, was petitioning to have me declared incompetent to manage financial affairs. He wanted to be appointed my guardian. I read the words 3 times before I understood them. Guardian. As if I were some helpless invalid. As if the woman who had raised him, kept a house together through lean years, paid every bill, and balanced every checkbook, had suddenly forgotten how to think. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands. The clock ticked loud on the wall. Guardian. No, not guardian, jailer. That evening he came by, walking in without knocking. He had that look on his face, all business, no warmth. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the table like a lawyer himself. Mom, this is for your own good, he said. You're not capable of handling something like this. The island, the papers, all this confusion. You'll just get hurt. Let me take over. I stared at him, the boy I once rocked to sleep, now speaking to me like a hostile witness. You want to take over, I said slowly, because you've already promised them the land. His face darkened. That's ridiculous. You don't understand what's at stake. I set the letter down between us. Don't I? You're dragging your own mother into court. That tells me all I need to know. For a moment his eyes flickered, not shame but anger. The kind of anger that rises when a plan doesn't go as smooth as expected. He stood abruptly and left without another word. The silence he left behind was heavier than anything. Days later I found myself standing outside the courthouse, clutching my purse like a lifeline. The building loomed gray and severe, its steps worn by 1,000 other feet. Inside, the halls smelled of old paper and floor polish. I took a seat in the back of the courtroom while his lawyer, a slick man with hair too perfect, laid out their case. They spoke of my age, my supposed forgetfulness, the danger of me being manipulated. They painted me as a frail old woman, incapable of protecting herself. I sat there, my spine stiff, my hands folded in my lap. Every word they said felt like a nail driven into the coffin they were building for me. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly. My knees ached, but my voice did not tremble. I am not incompetent, I said firmly. I read, I cook, I keep my accounts in order. I am the same woman who raised 3 children, who paid a mortgage, who stood beside her husband through every storm. My son wants guardianship not to protect me, but to take from me. He wants the island. That is all this is about. The judge studied me for a long moment, eyes sharp but not unkind. Do you have counsel, Mrs. Allen? He asked. I shook my head. Not yet. Then I suggest you find some, he said gently. This is not a matter to face alone. The gavel struck, and the hearing was postponed. But the seed of dread was planted. My own child had dragged me into the cold light of the courtroom, trying to prove I wasn't fit to run my own life. That night, I sat in my armchair long after the house went quiet. The note from my husband lay on my lap, the one that read, "Don't give up." I traced his handwriting with my finger. Fear coiled tight in me, but so did something else, rage. They thought I was weak. They thought I was confused. They thought they could strip me of my name and my rights like peeling wallpaper from an old wall. But I wasn't going to let them. No court, no suit, no gavel could erase who I was. And if I had to fight, I would. The fight in court only deepened my resolve. If my son and those developers wanted the island so desperately, then I had to see it for myself. I needed to understand what I was defending. It wasn't simple to arrange. The island lay off the Florida coast, a patch of land I had only ever seen on maps. I called the harbor office, using the names my husband had scribbled in his notebook. That's how I found Tom Harlow again. Older now, his voice rough like gravel but loyal still. When I told him who I was, his tone softened. "Your husband always knew this day would come," Tom said. "Meet me at the docks tomorrow morning. I'll take you across." The next day I drove down the coast with a scarf tied over my hair. The salt air sharpened my lungs. The docks smelled of bait and diesel. Tom was waiting, his frame bent with years but his eyes clear. He helped me into a small boat, the kind that rocked hard with every swell. The ride was rougher than I expected. Waves slapped the sides, spray dampened my skirt, and gulls screamed overhead. My hands clung to the wooden seat, but I kept my eyes fixed forward. After half an hour, the outline of the island rose ahead, a low sweep of green ringed with pale sand. When Tom pulled the boat close, I stepped onto the shore. My shoes sank into the sand, warm and soft. For a moment I simply stood there, the wind tugging at my scarf, the smell of salt and mangroves filling my nose. My heart beat fast. This was it. The land my husband had hidden, the land my son wanted so badly. At first glance it looked like any quiet spit of coast, palms swaying, gulls circling, a few crabs scuttling sideways. But as I walked inland, the island revealed more. Thick mangroves formed tangled walls, their roots twisting like old hands. Pools of still water lay hidden, alive with darting fish and dragonflies. Then I heard it. A sharp cry unlike the gulls. I looked up and saw a bird perched on a branch above me. Tall, slender, with a crest of feathers that caught the sun like a crown. Its eyes fixed on me as if guarding its kingdom. I recognized it from the photographs my husband had kept. This was no ordinary bird. I pulled the papers from my satchel, the conservation survey with Orrin Klein's notes. Protected species, it said. Rare nesting grounds. And here it was alive, watching me. I walked further, through grass that reached my waist, until I came upon a clearing near the lagoon. The water shimmered dark and still, ringed with reeds. On its edge were more birds, their nests built high, sheltered in the mangroves. The air was alive with their calls, a chorus of wild voices. Kneeling in the sand, I felt the truth of it. This wasn't just land. It was sanctuary. It held life that money could never buy. Developers might see beaches and hotel plots, but my husband had seen this. Fragile wings, rare songs, a place that could never be replaced. The weight of it pressed into me. No wonder he had left notes, copies, warnings. He hadn't been protecting fortune. He had been protecting this. And now somehow it was my burden. Tom joined me in the clearing, his boots crunching on the sand. "You see now?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I whispered. "I see." He nodded. "Your husband wanted it safe. He trusted you'd understand." I rose slowly, brushing sand from my skirt. "Developers know what's here, don't they?" Tom's mouth tightened. They've had whispers. Rare species drive value down. Makes the land hard to build on. They'll want those papers gone. That's why they need you to sign. If you hold firm, the law's on your side. But if you give in... He didn't finish. We walked back to the boat in silence, my thoughts a storm. The island wasn't just worth millions in money. It was worth more in what it carried: life, legacy. Something fragile my husband had tried to shield. As Tom steered us back across the waves, I gripped the satchel tight. I knew then that my fight wasn't about inheritance or property anymore. It was about standing guard over something far greater. When I returned home that evening, salt still on my skin, I felt a strange steadiness. The siege of my house, the lawsuits, the whispers, they were nothing compared to the sound of those birds, the sight of their nests cradled in the mangroves. For the first time since opening the safe, I knew exactly what I was fighting for. I had barely unpacked from the trip to the island when the knock came at my door. It was evening, the light going gold through the curtains, and I thought maybe it was a neighbor. But when I opened the door, my son was there. And he wasn't alone. 2 lawyers in dark suits flanked him, their briefcases tucked under their arms. My son didn't even smile. He pushed past me into the living room as if it were his house, not mine. The lawyers followed, settling themselves into my husband's old armchairs, crossing their legs like men accustomed to winning. "Mom," my son said, voice clipped, "this has gone on long enough. We need to settle this." One of the lawyers opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of papers, and laid them on the coffee table. "If you sign here," he said smoothly, "you'll receive a generous settlement. More than enough for the rest of your life. No hassle, no more pressure." I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. "And if I don't?" I asked quietly. The other lawyer leaned forward. "Then you risk everything. The courts can drag this out for years. Your finances, your health, do you really want that stress at your age?" My son didn't meet my eyes. He stared instead at the papers, as if willing me to pick up the pen. I folded my hands in my lap. "I won't sign." For a moment the room went still. Then my son slammed his palm against the table, making the papers jump. "Why are you being so stubborn? You don't understand what you're holding on to. It's just land. Worthless to you. Let it go." I met his anger with steady eyes. "It's not worthless. And it's not yours to take." The lawyers exchanged a glance, snapped their briefcases shut, and rose. "Think it over," one of them said coldly. "But don't wait too long. Opportunities vanish." They left, but my son lingered. He bent close to me, his voice a hiss. "Mom, you're going to regret this. Don't make me do things I don't want to do." He stormed out, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the glass in its frame. That night, the phone rang just after midnight. I answered, my voice tight, and heard nothing but silence. Then a man's voice, low, unfamiliar. "Hand over the papers," he said, "or you'll regret it." The line went dead. I sat there with the receiver pressed to my ear long after the dial tone began to hum. My hands were ice cold. I locked every door, checked every window, then sat awake in my chair, listening to the house breathe. The next day I found a black car parked across the street again. The same tinted windows, the same slow idling engine. I closed the curtains and forced myself to move about the house as if nothing were wrong. But every sound, a creak, a tap, the wind at the shutters, felt like someone watching me. When evening came, another envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one word typed in bold. "Last warning." I burned it in the kitchen sink. The pressure didn't let up. My son called again, his voice oily now, trying charm where anger had failed. "Mom, listen. Just sign. You'll get your share. You can live out your days in peace. I'll even buy you a place by the water. You'll never have to worry again." But I heard the lie under every word. I knew their plan was to cut me out completely. I could see it in the way his eyes no longer softened, the way he didn't even call me Mom anymore. Just you. That night I lay in bed and thought of my husband's note. Don't give up. His voice seemed to whisper through the dark, steady and strong. I pressed the quilt close to my chest and swore to myself I wouldn't. They could send lawyers. They could send cars. They could send threats in the night. But they would not have my signature. And if they wanted to fight, then fight we would. After the phone threats, after the lawyers with their smooth talk and my son's voice turned cold as ice, I knew I couldn't keep fighting alone. I'm stubborn, yes, but even stubbornness has its limits. I needed someone who understood the law better than I ever could. That's when I thought of Harold. Harold Price had been my husband's friend since their army days. A sharp man, steady and honest, the kind of lawyer who never wore flash but always carried weight. Over the years he'd helped us with small things. A will, a property line dispute, once even a tax mix-up. He had retired a few years back, but I knew he still kept an office downtown more out of habit than necessity. I called him. My voice was shaking, but as soon as he heard it was me, he said, "Mary, come by. Bring everything. Don't worry about the hour." The next morning, I drove to his little office above the bakery on Main Street. The smell of fresh bread drifted up the stairwell as I climbed, clutching the satchel that held the copies of the deeds, surveys, and my husband's notes. Harold greeted me in a cardigan and spectacles, his hair more silver than I remembered. But his handshake was firm. He sat me down, poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, and let me lay it all out on his desk. He listened without interrupting, only nodding now and then as I spoke. I told him about the safe, the island, my son's betrayal, the lawsuits, the threats. By the end my throat ached. When I finished, Harold leaned back in his chair, tapping the papers into a neat stack. "Mary," he said, "your husband wasn't just cautious. He was smart. He left you everything you need to protect yourself. But you can't keep these in your house anymore. Too risky. We'll make certified copies, file them with the county, and register them with the state. That way, even if someone steals or destroys the originals, your ownership is secure." Relief poured through me so strong my eyes filled. "You can do that?" "I can and I will," Harold said. "But you need to be prepared. Once your son realizes you've protected yourself legally, he might get desperate. He'll push harder." I nodded, my hands clasped tight. "Let him. I won't give up." Together we spent the day making copies, each page stamped, signed, and sealed. Harold drove me himself to the county clerk's office, where the deeds were logged officially under my name. He even arranged to store one set in a fireproof vault at his office. "You see," he said with a small smile, "now even if someone tears your house apart, you're covered." For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The papers were no longer just fragile sheets hidden in quilts and cookie tins. They were part of the record, safe from theft, safe from fire, safe from my son's hands. That evening, Harold walked me to my car. "Mary," he said quietly, "I've known your son since he was a boy. I never thought I'd see the day he'd turn on his own mother. But remember this, blood may turn, but the law doesn't lie. You stand firm and I'll stand with you." Driving home, the sky deepened into twilight, the horizon glowing faintly pink. I thought of my husband, of how he had built this shield not just with documents, but with people he trusted. I wasn't alone. When I reached my house, the black car was there again, idling under the street lamp. But this time I didn't flinch. I carried the knowledge in my heart. They couldn't erase me anymore. The law had me on record. Inside, I locked the door and sat in my armchair with a quilt over my knees. For the first time since the safe had opened, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. The fight wasn't over, I knew that much. My son would not give up easily. But now I had help. Now I had a shield. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not just fear but strength. The day of the final hearing dawned gray. with clouds pressed low over the courthouse. I dressed carefully that morning. A navy dress, simple but pressed, the pearl brooch my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary, and my sturdy shoes. My knees ached as I buckled them, but I stood tall. This wasn't just another appointment. This was the day I would stand against my own son. Harold met me on the courthouse steps. He carried a folder tucked under his arm and gave me a nod that was both steady and kind. "We're ready," he said. "Don't be afraid, Mary. Just tell the truth." The courtroom was colder than I remembered, its walls lined with dark wood that seemed to swallow the light. My son sat at the other table, flanked by his lawyers. He looked sharper than I'd ever seen him. Tailored suit, polished shoes, hair slicked back. But his eyes no longer belonged to the boy I had raised. They were hard, restless, full of calculation. When the judge entered and the session began, his lawyers moved quickly. They painted me as fragile, confused, unable to understand the complexities of property law. They spoke of guardianship, of protecting me from exploitation. My son sat silent, but his hands drummed lightly on the table, a rhythm of impatience. Then Harold rose. His voice, though older, carried across the room with quiet authority. "Your Honor, my client is not only competent, but she has acted with foresight and clarity. She has preserved documents, registered them with the state, and can demonstrate full understanding of her property. The attempt here is not protection. It is exploitation." He laid the certified papers before the judge, each stamped and sealed. He presented the conservation surveys, the legal protections tied to the island, and the notarized affidavits Harold had gathered from Tom Harlow and Orrin Klein. Each piece was like a stone placed carefully into a wall, building higher, stronger. When it was my turn, the judge asked me to speak. I rose slowly, my hands clasped to keep them from trembling. "I may be old," I began, my voice echoing in the hush, "but I am not confused. I know what my husband left me. I know why he hid it. And I know what my son has tried to do. This land is not ballast. It is not a prize to be sold. It is a legacy. And I will not see it stolen from me by anyone, not even by my own child." The room was silent when I finished. The judge studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Then he turned to my son. "Mr. Allen," he said, "this court recognizes your petition as an attempt to obtain control of your mother's estate through fraud and coercion. Petition denied." He struck the gavel. "This matter is closed." The sound rang through the chamber like thunder. I sank back into my seat, my heart pounding. Relief washed over me, but it was not joy. Across the room, my son's face had twisted, not with shame but with anger. He leaned toward his lawyers, whispering furiously, his jaw tight. When his eyes met mine, I saw no recognition there. Only blame, as if I were the one who had betrayed him. The bailiff called the next case. Just like that, it was over. Outside, the air smelled of rain. Harold walked beside me, steady as ever. "You've won, Mary," he said softly. "It's done." I nodded, but my throat ached. Victory didn't feel like I thought it would. The papers were safe. The law was on my side. The island remained mine, untouched. But my family, my son, was gone. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that press is in. I spread the documents before me, not to check them, but to remind myself that the fight had been real, that it had meant something. I thought of my husband, of the way he had stood in that very room decades ago. His hand resting on the safe as he told me, "This is our protection for the future." He had been right. But the protection had come at a price I never could have imagined. The phone rang once, then stopped. I didn't answer. I knew it wouldn't be him, not really. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who saw his mother as an obstacle. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into their folder, and tucked them into the cupboard where I now kept my strongest things. Then I went to the window and looked out at the street. The black car was gone. The shadows seemed lighter. But my heart was heavy. The island was safe. My husband's legacy was preserved. The court had seen through the lies. I had stood my ground and I had not been broken. Yet as I sat in the silence of my own house, I realized the truth. There was no joy in victory. Only the bitter knowledge that, in saving the past, I had lost my future with the one I loved most. The land remained with me. The island, with its rare birds and its secret lagoon, was mine to guard. But my family was gone. And that, I thought, staring into the dark beyond my window, was the highest price I had ever paid. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.